Welcome. We live in a world where hate speech is a problem. The Council of Europe asserts that hate speech covers many forms of expression which is spread, incite, promote, or justify hatred, violence, and discrimination against a person or group of persons for a variety of reasons. Perhaps most visible manifestations of hate speech today are racism and violent extremism. For policymakers, though, it is a delicate task to ensure balance between freedom of speech and hate speech. I'm Mubashar Hasan, your host of the show, The Melting Pot, and today we are going to discuss about hate speech, its trajectories and manifestations in Southeast Asia. This Facebook and YouTube live discussion is jointly organized by Melting Pot and the Asia Center. The discussion will later be available as podcast in iTunes and Spotify. Please participate in the discussion by commenting and asking questions. Today's guest is Dr. James Gomez, Regional Director of the Asia Center, a social enterprise based in Bangkok. Previously, Dr. Gomez has worked in Bangkok University and Webster University in Thailand and Monash University in Australia in senior management positions. He was a regional director of the Amnesty International from 2017 to 18. And Dr. Gomez is a member of the Singapore Democratic Party. He contested in the past national elections in Singapore. Dr. Gomez, welcome. How are you doing today?
Very good, Mubashar. Lovely to be here. Very excited to chat with you about a scourge that is affecting us all around the world called hate speech. I hope we'll have a good conversation and also engage with the commentators who will be on the program.
Yes. So, to begin with, tell us very briefly about the Asia Center and give us a bit of background information about its recent report on hate speech in Southeast Asia. For example, what countries you study for this report?
Great. Asia Center was founded in 2015 in Bangkok, and a second branch was registered in Malaysia in the south in Johor Bahru in 2018. The aim was really to respond to changes in academia and research institutions because many of them are fragmenting and restructuring. We thought that it was a great opportunity to take one component of that, which is a think tank outside of the traditional parameters such as university, and put it out there in the public domain and to sort of speak directly to stakeholders. And it has been 5 years. We found a self-funded sustainable model incorporated as a social enterprise, and that has led us to do quite well. So we are quite excited first to have established in Bangkok and then moving on to Malaysia. Specifically about the report covers the 10 countries in Southeast Asia that make up the member states of ASEAN. Because, given that the Asia Center is based in Bangkok in the heart of Southeast Asia, we thought it would be strategic just to look at this geographical area. It was an issue where hate speech has been around for a very, very long time. And a lot of the discussion has been around race and religion. But at the same time, we realized there were, interesting and new developments, especially as a result of COVID-19. We see a spike in a lot of hateful messages from a variety of places. So we thought it was timely to investigate this phenomenon and just put the findings out there. And that's the purpose of the report.
Wonderful. So let us delve deep into the report and share some of the findings. But before that, I would like you to give a generic understanding of the topic we're discussing today. As you know, our program is educational by nature. So, my first question to you is, what is hate speech and how one could distinguish between hate speech and freedom of speech? Why you choose to look at hate speech in Southeast Asia?
Well, from an academic research and technical point of view, hate speech has no legal definition. Um, so that's the starting point. States and society want to manage hateful comments, abrasive comments that are hurtful to people based traditionally on community identities that are shaped by race and religion. But as society evolves and becomes sophisticated, there are other forms of identity with which people, affiliate themselves with that goes beyond race and religion. So, in trying to manage such hateful commentary from all quarters, the key question that arises is, does it impact freedom of expression? And in many cases, especially from a state perspective, as they try to manage communications, you find freedom of expression is curtailed. Many times, states are captured by specific regimes. They could be military, they could be political parties. In some other places, they could be also hereditary sultanates or kingdoms. So, as a result, these rules to mitigate hate speech or even outlaw it are sometimes usurped for political reasons, and that infringes freedom of expression. And secondly, this report holds everybody accountable and investigates all persons and institutions that articulate hate speech. So, in that regard, governments are also subjected to this review because one must not forget government and government officials also spew hate speech, and they too needs to be accountable. So a principal trajectory is to just help us understand how we can manage. And an initial thought that comes through the report is we need to take a multi-stakeholder approach. Governments alone cannot be entrusted with the responsibility of preventing hurt to communities.
Um, would you share the name of the countries you studied?
Yeah, so there are 10 countries. There is Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar. There's Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, Philippines, and there's always a trick question. One other country in Thailand. Yeah, so that's 10. Thanks for testing me. I remember them all.
I was curious, and I know I shared some of the questions with you, but I was curious why you didn't include China and Japan.
It's simply because of scoping. Given that we have limited time and limited resources, so we have not looked at these countries. But what I can say in relation to Japan is. Uh, as a result of putting out the report, we also reached out to write opinion pieces with partners we have in different regions. So Asia Center team with Dr. Ramachandran, we had a first op-ed in the Bangkok Post. We have one more on Myanmar together with Myanmar National now residing in the US, and that came out on the Irrawaddy just last week. And we do have a piece with a Japanese academic that is being completed and being pitched to an English language Japanese daily. We've got a couple of more on the pipeline, including one in French that will go out somewhere in Europe as well, and one in Bahasa on Malaysia that we are currently working on. So the report is also making its round beyond just the 40 page that we have on the website, but also through web ad, through op-eds. And of course, we are also looking forward to working with you to see if we can have one piece, there may even be a comparison between regions, between Southeast Asia and South Asia, and put the message out.
That's a good plan. We should ponder it further. So now coming back to the report, you seem to argue that without going back to the history of colonization and how nationalism as well as religion played key role in forming and reforming nation states in Southeast Asia, one would not understand the current context of hate speech in the region. Care to explain?
Yes. What we say in the report is really that the primary indicators of hate speech have always been around race and religion. And we try to show why this is the case and where it came from. So we were able to trace it back to colonial laws and practices, whereas the colonial demand for labor, cheap labor, and much of it indentured labor happened in Southeast Asia. The way the colonial authority managed diversity was to segregate them into communities. So they had policies, they encouraged, self-help. So you found communities were organizing themselves across around race, language, and religion. So you had, the rise of Little India or Chinatown across the regions as these two large diaspora communities came into Southeast Asia. So there is that historical link. Now, moving forward, many countries such as Malaysia, to some extent Brunei, and also Singapore, they continue these policies of segregation and label their societies in distinct ethnic and sometimes even religious clusters. So because they use these parameters, it continued. In other countries, such as Myanmar, they try to focus on the dominant local indigenous communities. So because of the colonial experience, I think it triggered and pricked into the consciousness of the peoples of Southeast Asia a more racially, culturally, and to a large extent, a religiously nuanced identity formation. And I think that's the basis around which laws were initially formulated in order to mitigate intercommunal hate and violence. So that's really the background, and we wanted to show the chronology of developments there.
That was an excellent explanation. Thank you for that. You in the report you identified 4 types of hate speeches in the region. What are they? Could you give us a country-specific distribution of each type of hate speech? For example, where you have seen one sort of hate speech is prevalent more than any other country. Thank you.
Right. The four forms, one, hate speech around race and religion. 2, hate speech around foreign nationals, in particular against migrant workers and refugees. 3, hate speech against gender and sexual minorities. And 4, hate speech shaped by political ideology, values, and viewpoints. they are more or less existent across almost all countries in Southeast Asia, and I would even venture to say beyond. But of course, given the historical and political circumstances, there are pronounced incidences of each of them in different countries. The race and religion one is quite prominent in Malaysia because of the colonial divide and rule. You have the local Malay community, a Muslim community. You have the Chinese community that traditionally came from China, and the Indian community historically that came from South India. So there you have, schools, language policies around race and religion, and they have introduced laws around that. And their politics is very much shaped by these fissures around, racial and religious identity. And to a less contentious effort, it's also similar in Singapore. In terms of foreign workers, foreign nationals, and refugees, you have a very pronounced issue against foreigners, migrant workers from China. This is very pronounced in the Philippines. If you have everyday conversations with Filipinos, they will, very easily articulate their unhappiness. It's a mixture of Duterte's open arm policy towards China, taking less than a robust stand against the incursion of China into South China Sea, and also the large amounts of gambling, online gambling dens, troll farms, and other illicit businesses that operate out of the Philippines with Chinese nationals. So this is a very huge problem, and it's on the lips of many people in Manila. So that's one issue. If we speak about values against hate against around political values, ideology, and viewpoints, you see that very pronounced in Thailand and Cambodia. Hun Sen will call his political opponents traitors and dogs, and the language used against political opponents in Thailand is around calling the opponents being untie, which is being undignified and so on. And these are the language used around politics, and these are used to mobilize supporters for and against. And finally, in terms of LGBTI community, this is politicized, especially in Indonesia, especially during election campaigns. We saw vivid examples of this in the presidential elections in 2009, when the contender Prabowo was using such language of hate against the LGBTI community by suggesting that the incumbent President Jokowi would be opening the floodgates for same-sex marriage and giving further rights and liberties to LGBTI community. So the hate against LGBTI community is mobilized for political purposes. So you see that range of hate deployed in different countries in Southeast Asia.
Thank you for this quite succinct and brief and to the point summary. I think our audience and listeners would benefit from this. Let me visit to some of the comments we received. So I'm going to put it on the screen, and you could also respond to it. So Harun Mahdi says, very good topic. Yes, of course. That's why Asia Center studied this topic. Simon Rija Priyash, a young faculty at Brack University in Bangladesh, has a question for you. It says, have the states around South and Southeast Asia intensified mass surveillance in the name of contract tracing for COVID-19 patients, or curbing hate speech, or tracking terrorists, etc. So I think you could respond to that.
In terms of surveillance, there are two dimensions. States have moved, they still use physical surveillance on selected targets as informed by the Ministry of Interior, both interior intelligence and also military intelligence. So these two, and they do the traditional surveying. Of course, it's expensive. There are a lot of gaps, and it requires people's power. And you need to make sure your informers actually stay with you and go the mile, because people change their minds. Sometimes they are difficult. So that dimension is still there. But of course, what we have seen over the years is online surveillance, tracing your email communication, so on and so forth. And this has moved to the phones. So mobile phones, everybody has a mobile phone. So this was going on anyway for a long time, so they can trace your movements, and everybody tells you never trust your mobile phone. But what are the new developments is what is interesting. Without informing the citizens, many countries in the region have introduced surveillance cameras in many areas, in public areas, and increasingly also in housing areas. So you will just have to look up around you, and you'll be surprised at the range, volume, and range. Range meaning the width, but also the capacity to see these physical cameras everywhere. It has become so widespread that we have also internalized surveillance. We use the name of security, and we have also brought surveillance, CCTV equipment into our homes and outside our homes for mostly we say security, anti-theft, those kinds of things. And it also has happened in the workplace. But the new development is really the public articulation of surveillance, in particular, the promotion of tracing apps. So what has become more and more common is the tracing app situation, where you check in and check out of a place that you visit because of COVID contact tracing. Now, it's still quite cumbersome. People still do it because there's a law, otherwise you can't access a particular establishment, so people do that. Now, the question to ask is how comfortable and how it will become normalized and become part of the way of life. Now, states have already brought out the issue of having it planted on your phone, so that then the tracing app becomes natural, and also you can talk to each other. So in your close proximity, then I will know that whether you had COVID or not, and whether yes. And China, of course, has been very wide usage of this. It's one of the most surveilled country in the world. So I think the key issue would really be how much of a new normal would this be? As it stands now, I think people see it as a temporary inconvenience they put up with. Whether they will become comfortable, it remains to be seen. As it stands now, there is resistance and awareness of not allowing the state too much access.
So, in summary of that, of your rather long answer, would I be right in saying that even though states have intensified mass surveillance in the name of contract tracing, there is a there are resistance from citizens and civil societies in Southeast Asian states. So, so there is a space for democratic resistance. Is that you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is everyday users do find it a bit cumbersome to utilize this tracing app. So there is that kind of the everyday resistance out of a discomfort of using it. If we are thinking about organized resistance, that's a different thing because one of the things to be cognizant about is the temporary emergency laws and other policies have accelerated the rise of authoritarianism and have given larger state incursion into the civic and political space. Now, and in the early stages of the COVID-19, we actually felt quite helpless that this would be overrun. But what has happened is many states are unable to have good management of the COVID-19 situation. So as a result, states are now suffering or experiencing a legitimacy deficit. And because of this legitimacy deficit, there is now some momentum to push back. So I think the discourse then has to be about how can we turn this around and roll back and resist the incursion the state has made in the name of COVID-19. And even in spite of making those incursions, they still mess up and mismanage. And because they have reduced legitimacy now, the ability to push back is more out there, you know, and I think you can mobilize better than in the early months of the COVID.
Okay, we would move on now. I'm just gonna show one more comment and I'm gonna come back to other comments. So it's my friend Ben Sconfield from Bangkok, and he says, "Go melting pot." Thank you. We're gonna come back to your report. So in the report, you have touched upon a bit on online platforms in promoting hate speech. So also some of the critics have argued that proliferation of online platforms have played a pivotal role in promoting hate towards other. Is it the case in Southeast Asia?
Well, social media platforms, technology companies are businesses. So, hate speech drives traffic. So, why would you want to, mitigate that traffic? Because with traffic, you get more people on board, more eyeballs, and more argument to your, advertisers that eyeballs are getting the necessary hits. However, at the same time, there is a public backlash that the technology companies are not doing enough. So they have begun to demonstrate they are doing something, and they definitely do the publicity and the media engagement. And there's enough evidence. All the, whether it's WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, they all have taken symbolic actions to show that steps have been taken for to mitigate and reduce hate speech. There are three steps. First is the identification of hate speech that could be used, that can be done manually through man hours, and also using AI, which is not effective, but has some hits, yeah, because a lot of it is context. Then it's the management of content or the dissemination of content. So do we let that, once it's flagged, do we let that ride? So they give you different tools. You can hide the comment, you can raise a complaint, they can, sort of ban you temporarily. So those are content dissemination strategies. But of course, it requires affected parties and third parties to raise that complaint to have that mitigated. And finally, it's of course this discontinuation of accounts. This takes place less, and in terms of volume and also in terms of the number of accounts. So again, we have seen things happen in Malaysia, also recently in the run-up to the elections in Singapore, but these are just nominal and does not affect the whole of society where the volume of hate speech still continues. So in that report, what we say is we recognize these, but we also want the technology companies to do more. Technology companies are pushing the buck back to the states and say, you legislate. We don't want to do anything. You legislate, and then we will take the necessary actions. So the states are also caught out because in terms of what is it that they will legislate? I mean, the states prefer to legislate, and then, evidence has shown time to time, they use it for political self-preservation. So these are some of the tensions and ongoing conversation about the role of technology companies.
Thank you. I was wanting to come back to that point of your recommendation, where you ask the online platforms and government to work together to combat hate speech. But it's great that you have addressed that here. Well, we're going to move to our next question, and it's about racism. Um, and James, you must have seen that in recent times, the Black Lives Matters movement have swept across the world in protest of racism and discrimination. Um, However, the Asia Center report found that racism is a persistent problem in Southeast Asian societies. Why is that?
I think the terminologies and the historical context are different between, Black Lives Matter and how we can apply that in Southeast Asia. Black Lives Matter also has in its heart the injustice of slavery. So that terminology and the use of modern day slavery, when we speak about indentured labor and exploited labor, is still very relevant. But however, when you come to Southeast Asia, because of the historical context, the movement of diverse communities in the region has always been in the quest for cheap labor. So it's a patronage system traditionally in the region, and it's feudal, it's patriarchal. So what the region has experienced is really indentured labor and continues in modern days that we see in both documented, undocumented, and irregular migrant workers. So that phenomena is carried forward in modern times. And the clusters of exploited workers are community defined. So in the colonial times, the labors were drawn from South Asia, in particular southern India, and then from China, again, very much from the coastal provinces around Guangzhou, Hainan, Fujian, So these were the traditional, supply points for migrant, many of them indentured labor here. And then moving forward, some decades later, there were also inter-regional movements. So you will find that in the post World War II nationalism and industrialization or national development of these countries, a lot of the labor came from within the region. So it's not unusual in the early days for Singapore to have construction workers from Thailand. And we had domestic helpers who came from the Philippines and continue to do so. We have more coming from Indonesia as well as Myanmar, and to some extent also Vietnam. Uh, the push for workers has now gone regional. And we are talking about unskilled, low skilled, and exploited workers. So they have now, one traditional source now for many, almost a couple of decades now, is from Bangladesh. And you will see visible presence of members of the Bangladesh community in Malaysia and Singapore, and some undocumented workers, a small amount also in Thailand. Um, so, and India and China continues to draw, workers from these categories. So you find that, migrant workers, documented, undocumented, irregular workers are identified by their community and along race and religious lines. And therefore, when situations such as COVID-19 happens, a mixed people don't know how to express their feelings. Essentially, they are afraid. They are anxious for two things: one about health risks, and a second one is about the economy and livelihoods. So because people can't, a lot of it is pent up and they don't have the language or the outlet to express themselves. So it comes out as hate against the communities which they feel might contribute to health risks and perhaps livelihood. But who are the culprits who create this hate within the community? And oftentimes, and the report gives an indication of this, is government hate speech. Because governments, because they also can't manage the situation, and they are in a position of power, very close to the media, many of the media which is aligned with them, state media. So in the case of Malaysia, you find that migrant workers have been bearing the brunt of government hate speech, uh, saying that they are, high risk COVID-19 carriers. Many of them are illegal in the country. So with such messages going viral online, it reverberates in the community and bounces back as hate discourse from the community. So that's the vicious cycle, and because of the nature and source of such, migrant indentured labors in modern times, you find, hate speech continues to be articulated on ethnic cultural parameters.
The report articulates that the hatred towards foreign nationals, migrant workers, and refugees are high in the region, and you have just addressed that. Though it is perplexing, James, isn't it? Because some of these countries need migrants to boost their economies. So migrants are meaningfully contributing in the development of these countries. I know you have touched a bit upon this on Malaysia, but how is Singapore? And also, I want you to summarize in key points like why such hatred towards migrant, like two, 3 points. Thank you.
There are different perspectives. It depends on where you sit, whether you are the sending country or or the community that is the source of the migrant labor, and then the host country perspective, whether you are government, whether you are a financial stakeholder, and then the community at large. So the discourses crisscross, and sometimes they don't meet. So from the migrant worker perspective and the sender country, they see it from a perspective of service, right? We give our labor, we help you, and in return, of course, sometimes we don't even get a fair wage, but still we are there. We help build your society and not ours. There's so many years that we give to you for the betterment of your people and your country. So that's one discourse. On the receiving side, obviously it's divided. Uh, of course, many in the community of the receiving side appreciate the support, whether it's the help domestic workers give, looking after young children, elderly parents, or just helping out in the household so the family can function in a very high urban and pen society. So there's a lot of appreciation of that. People appreciate that some of the workers keep the environment clean and help, contribute to the economy and all of that. But at the same time, there are significant members of the community. Many of them will not articulate this, but definitely think it. They actually think the migrant worker, the host country is doing the migrant workers a service by providing them employment, a cleaner, maybe more modern environment, and also a wage. Things the migrant worker may not avail themselves back in their home country. So there's definitely that kind of thinking. And time to time, it is articulated, and these days very easily online. And it does have some resonance in that particular, stock of people. And these are the discourses that are, running through in places like Singapore, and to some extent Malaysia. Singapore is a very small place, so the migrant workers are visible everywhere. They are culturally distinct, so they are instantly spotted, and because it's a small physical space, on the off days when they gather, uh, they can be noted easily. So domestic workers who hang around the city on the off days, on Sundays, or workers from South Asia when they go to Little India, so we have had a history of inappropriate language used to address and even describe such situations.
Thank you. Um, those who just tuned in, I'm holding a fascinating discussion with Dr. James Gomez about hate speech in Southeast Asia. This Facebook and YouTube live discussion is jointly organized by Melting Pot and the Asia Center. The discussion will later be available as podcast in iTunes and Spotify. Next Monday, on August 4 at 8 p.m. Sydney time, Dr. Bina Di Costa, a professor at Australian National University, and Mr. Julian Francis, OBE, a humanitarian and development expert, will join me to discuss refugees and narratives, past and present. Make sure to tune in. Coming back to James, we are nearing the end. I have two more questions and there are two more comments I want you to respond to. Then we could call it a day. In your recommendations, you have suggested that the government and tech companies should work in tandem to combat hate speech. I know you have addressed on this topic a little while ago. Maybe for those who just joined in, uh, a brief comment from you would be useful for them to understand the context.
Yeah. The best way to understand the recommendation is really to manage hate speech or take effective steps. It must be a multi-stakeholder approach, which means not just government and tech companies, but also civil society, both local, regional, and international, as well as independent institutions. Independent institutions meaning national institutions such as human rights institutions, as well as even parliaments. Multi-party parliaments can hold governments accountable simply because governments are also part of the hate speech architecture. So the key recommendation is a multi-stakeholder approach. If we just rely on government as the mitigator, then we are giving them a blank check, and that blank check is not something that is going to be helpful. So we must also keep the government in check because they are equally responsible for spewing hate speech.
I think that could be another show on how government, uh, orchestrate hate speech in Southeast Asia and also in South Asia. That's a general trend we're seeing, and it's very unfortunate. At this moment, I want to go back to some of the comments. There's a good question from Harun Mehdi. He's a PhD student in the US, and he his questions to you is: does hate speech includes rumor?
Right. Well, as long as it's hurtful and harmful, I'm sure they can be considered hate speech because rumors are sometimes, hearsay, right? And they can spread like wildfire. And as long as the message is harmful, I think then we can certainly consider rumors as part of hate speech. It's a fine line, in terms of truth, right? So here we are not talking about truth because false news can also be hate speech. So rumors would fall under that category.
Okay. And there is a rather long comment from Alex Song. So his comment, and I think there is a question too, is contract tracing is likely to be normalized, and in future there would be RFID and facial recognition. There needs to be check and balance to keep the state in check. How do you suggest this could be done? Can there be a global or regional consensus for personal data use?
So again, I come back to one of our key recommendations because it is the government that has the political authority and absolute power to do these things. So government needs to be kept in check. So the first tier is to check them in parliament. If you have a multi-party parliament, if you don't, I think it's important to work towards that. And actually, the component, portions of the multi-party system must also perform that check and balance. Because if you get multi-parties and they all think together, that's going to be a problem as well. And apart from the multi-party, I think you also need to have independent institutions outside of the legislature. So whether it's an independent election commission or the judiciary or a human rights commission, these are component things that need to be developed. And of course, you cannot still depend on the national level because there's a risk of it being subsumed through politics. Therefore, global and regional networks are also important. So in the region, I think it's the mixture of civil society groups, independent media, and international non-governmental organization. At the global level, we can consider the different UN mechanisms The ICRD, the International Convention for the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, that's one. Of course, there are challenges in the frequency and quality of reporting them. There are other instruments such as the Universal Periodic Review, you have the special rapporteurs. So these are a slew of mechanisms that people can avail to just to call these hate speech behavior out. And in this specific case, to highlight when privacy is infringed around access to personal data.
We're gonna show one more comment. It's Harun Mahdi again. Can we study racism in Asia and Black Lives Matter in the US under one thematic area? For example, theory like structural violence.
I believe knowledge is very, very decentralized. I'm not a big fan of big theories and stuff like that because, in the philosophical pursuit of truth, things are constantly changing. I think whether you do a research or a talk show or, whether you do a thesis or write an op-ed, it's really to frame your message, inform your reader or your viewer where you're coming from and how you arrived at your conclusion, and begin having a conversation about your thoughts about a particular topic. Because the truth or clarity is a journey, so it's not a be and end all. So use anything that you think is useful within your context and means and resources, and frame your understanding of the world. And then with that understanding, have conversations with many people as possible as you seek clarity. I mean, I think the truth is out there, but I doubt you can get to it.
Okay. I came. So this is my last question to you. Given that democratic outlook in South Asia is poor, don't you think the problem of hate speech is going to persist in future?
I think hate speech will always be there because these are the fallibility of the human nature. We can only say we want to be kind to others and hold ourselves accountable as well. But I think for us here at the Asia Center and the report is really to point out, beside the traditional race and religion, handle and how we view hate speech, there are really other forms that we should also pay attention to and have those things on board, and to make the message clear that giving anyone a blank check to manage hate speech itself is a dangerous thought, that really we want to take a multi-stakeholder approach. Otherwise, some of the worst perpetrators of hate speech are really the state. And in Southeast Asian history, in contemporary history, we have many cases of genocide and mass killing, from Indonesia in 65 to the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia to the ongoing atrocity in Rakhine State against the Rohingya, southern Thailand, in Mindanao, in the Philippines, and the list goes on. So because it's clear that the states are part of the problem and its officials, that we shouldn't give the state a blank check. In terms of COVID-19, I'm also happy to report and update your viewers that Asia Center is presently working on another report, which we hope in the next few months we will be able to finalize, which is studying what is the impact of COVID-19 on democracy in Southeast Asia. So our report titled Democracy in Southeast Asia, Building Resilience Against Authoritarianism, is something that we hope to publish in the next 3 months. And in that, I think we will be able to make an assessment of how things are panning out given COVID-19 and the temporary and emergency laws in place that are putting a shackle hold on democracy in the region.
I'm looking forward to it. We are at the end of our discussion today. Dr. Gomez, thank you very much for your participation, and I look forward to welcoming you in some other day.
Yeah,
So,
thank you very much for the opportunity, Mubashar. I wish you, your audience, a good day and very much success for the Melting Pot Show with you as the host. We hope to also have you over at Asia Center, and we invite your audiences also to check out our Facebook and website so we can, jointly go on this intellectual journey. So once again, thank you very much.